Well, we're gathered here at the Ottawa Sports Summit to talk about grant applications. This is one of those issues that's incredibly difficult and challenging and time-consuming for most people. It's vital, and yet it takes a ton of time for folks to do it. And we're also finding that because it's a side-of-the-desk kind of exercise for a lot of folks, that the quality isn't necessarily where it needs to be in order for folks to be successful. So we've gathered some really smart people around this whole issue of decades worth of experience. So ideally at the end of all of this, folks leave here with much better knowledge about the whole process and some very practical guidance and tools that they can use in their next grant application.
Most people that have tried raising money for their sports organization fail. That's a fact. It's very, very difficult to raise money. And I think there's one important question that we need to answer as a group. Are we making it easy for the funder to say yes? And as simple as that question might sound, it's loaded with complexity. Are we crafting the right story? Do we have the right data points? Are we removing the barriers, the objections as they arise?
This event is for the community to have a better understanding of what it is that they have to do if they're going to ask people for money. Very simply, all not-for-profits, all charities need resources to do the great programming that they do. There are a number of us that do that in a whole bunch of different ways, and we're here to give them the big messages of what they want to think about when they're applying for money.
I would like them to take away exactly how to engage with us to make sure that they're submitting a grant that is something that we can approve. Or even better, if they are submitting something that is definitely not going to be approved, let's have that conversation up front so that everybody's aware and that it's less of a learning process for them and more of a determination process for them.
Funding is limited, so we want to make sure that when people apply for funding, they are successful. So if we can help make it a little easier, provide some tools, then we're hoping we'll have more successful applications and they'll get the funding that they need to keep those programs going.
There are so many stories of people that have amazing ideas and they've made one little mistake that is a deal breaker. Because we see so many of these things and it is truly heartbreaking. I've had people on the phone crying because they can't do the great work that they do in community. And a lot of the time it's tied back to they didn't do their homework. And they missed one little thing, they didn't ask the right question, and that is truly heartbreaking because ultimately it's not really about the funder, it's about the community-based organization. So we're here to dispel the myths, give them hard advice, and support them in being able to raise the revenue that they need.
So here's the deal. First of all, thank you for taking time from your busy schedules and for your leadership, because it's because of all of you that sport in Ottawa is extremely healthy. And together, we're going to attack this topic called Grants Demystified. I have no doubt that after tonight, you will hopefully be inspired, encouraged, and more importantly, have tools to allow you to go get those grants. A couple of things to just set up the evening, the way we've approached this. I had the privilege and pleasure of meeting this gentleman 3 years ago that changed my approach to facilitating sessions like this. His name is Joy Ito, and Joy Ito is the executive director of MIT Labs. That's a pretty good, prestigious sandbox he's got. Every single person that reports into Joy has at least 2 PhDs. Joy has no university degree. He's the first person at Higher Learning to be given the keys to such a prestigious educational sandbox, if you want. And here's what he told me when I met him. And he actually consequently delivered a TED Talk, and he opened it that way. So I felt privileged when I met him at the bar and he gave me a soundbite. He said, "I believe education is what others try to do to you, and learning is what you do for yourself. And as a result of that, I'm changing MIT Labs. People are going to come here to learn and not to be educated." And Marcia and I, Marcia, our executive director of the Ottawa Sport Council, have really taken this notion seriously to the point that what you're going to see tonight and how we designed this is we've designed it in a way that you're here to learn. We're here to learn. Another thing that I would really encourage you, if you haven't seen this model, I highly, highly recommend this book. And I struggle with book recommendations because I have no idea where you are in your personal journey. But it's called The Mindset by Carol Dweck. And there's a model that gets me thinking. Are we operating from a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Translation. We can look at funding as a huge challenge, or we can look at it as what a great opportunity if we get it right. So again, my job as your facilitator here is to make sure that we're operating in a growth mindset, because I truly believe that this is a skill that can be built on. One question to get you thinking tonight: are you making it easy for your funders to say yes to your idea? That's the question we should all be obsessed with. Are we making it easy for your funders to say yes? I.e., how's your storytelling? Is your case compelling? Do you have data points? Did you anticipate objections? Did you role play it with someone? Did you show your proposal to a friend that could actually be real with you and say, actually, you wouldn't even fund your own idea, so how do you expect someone else to do that for you? So I think that's something to really consider. Are you making it easy for your funders to say yes? Here's an example of someone in sport that truly has a growth mindset. Because some of you might say, you know what, I've been trying this forever, it doesn't work, or I'm getting tired of trying to fund my sport ideas. That's not what I signed up for. I got a passion for my sport, but I never signed up for the funding piece. So let's watch this video and tell me what you think after.
Madonna Buter, an 86-year-old nun. Oh, sorry, sister. Sister Madonna Buter, 86 years old, goes for a morning run. Good for you, sister. She's still active at her age. That's great. Whoa, maybe a little too active. Nap time, sister?
I don't think so.
The sister doesn't think so. Okay. Wait, what? Iron Man? Oh, no. This is a bad idea, sister. A real bad idea.
Relax, she's the Iron Nun.
But she won't make it. This is an Iron Man.
The first 45 didn't kill me.
You've done 45 of these? Okay. Do your thing, sister. Do your thing.
You know you've arrived when you have a Nike commercial, right? You should check out her story, it's phenomenal. She had never run until the age of 46. And one day she went in to talk to the priest, her friend, and she said, I don't feel good. I just don't have energy. And he said, why don't you start walking at lunch? Walking turned into triathlons, triathlons turned into Ironman, and to this day, she has redefined the age for the Ironman. So the Hawaii Ironman used to be 80, and she's done it at, I think 85 was her last one, or 86 or 84, whatever the age is. But the point is, she challenged the status quo. So I would encourage us tonight to really have a growth mindset. And it's very easy to go to the negatives. It's very easy to focus on the problems. But imagine if we actually just focus on the opportunity. And that's what we're going to try to do tonight, is keep you in that growth mindset. And we'll hear the same from our panel, because they've all seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of funding, I'm sure. And again, we always thank our sponsors, because this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have the support of government. And so I think we need to recognize that. Enough said. My job now is to make sure we're having the right conversation. If we're having the right conversation, then we're in a good place.
Okay, so what do you feel grant providers consider are the characteristics of a successful grant application? And what we did was we commenced to discuss, and I was jotting down the points that were raised. One, follow the rules. Sell in the first few lines. Truth is an important component. Salient details. In other words, no overdo. The impact and the outcomes of your reason for having the grant in the first place. Have a management plan. If possible, get someone informed as you're writing the application who might have an in with the board reviewing the application. Answer the questions asked, and also have a goal for the application.
So we talked about what part of the community will be involved. So what are the benefits to the community as a whole? And Is the money going to be used for inclusivity, health benefits, safety benefits, those kinds of things?
Very good.
Some of the things we come up with was clear goals and clear outcomes must be stated. The amount of the grant in dollars. In other words, is a lender, are you asking for more money than what the lender is prepared to give?
Very good, very good.
How many people benefit from this grant? Basically, if it's one person doing the grant to buy himself a new pair of skis compared to a group of people, you know, that belong to a club that want to buy a whole set of skis. Does it fit into their mission? Like, why are they giving the grant, and what are they looking for out of it? It's a good idea to list all your partners. You know, give them an idea how many people that they're dealing with. A good high-level overview on how the money will be spent. One other thing we thought of too was the lender's going to look at: do you have access to other funds? You know, that other than what you're asking for.
I'm a business trainer and a consultant. And one of the words we don't allow our customers, our clients, ever to use when they're selling or negotiating is the word cost. They have to use the word investment. Because if I say it's going to cost you X, what am I saying? It's going to set you back. If I say it's an investment of $5,000, what I'm saying is you're going to get a return for this. And it's going to deliver against your mission. So words matter. Words are critical, and I'm kind of summarizing and synthesizing a bit, but really think through the words that are used. If you were the funder, would you sign off on that? Right? And that's what we're trying to get you in that right mindset. Who else wants to share?
The motives of the people that are giving you money need to be considered as well. So what's your impact to them? So it may be they're looking for more exposure. Therefore, if you have your own social media presence, then they get to tag along with that. That's a plus for them. If they're looking for to look after a particular demographic of people, then that's a plus for them. And so I think considering the benefits to the grant giver is important to address in the proposal. It's like
what are you bringing to the table? Like if it's it could be some some additional funding, or even more importantly, time and effort and work of volunteers or people who are going to work for the long haul.
Very good.
Other thing we talked about is what are the plans for continuity? In other words, if you get funds for to initiate a 2-year program, I think it would be logical to have a plan for self-sustaining that, maintaining that program afterwards. You can build it up and stuff like that. So that type of stuff really helps, I think.
We were talking about Trillium, of course, which is our favorite funding organization. Yes. And one thing I think is important that Mike and I did at the Miracle League is built a relationship with Trillium well in advance before an application. Sitting down with them, they have local officials in Ottawa, sitting down with them, having a discussion, explaining to them who we are, letting them know, yes, eventually, it could be tomorrow, it could be a year from now, we will be applying. And making sure when that application comes through, they know who we are already. And then that pipeline of a relationship is there so they can call us, ask questions. Because we were turned down the first time. But we were turned down, but before we actually got the notice, they called us and said, we're going to turn you down, but here's why. So that when you reapply, because we know you are, these are the things you need to know. But that relationship already existed for us, and I think that's so critical for all of us as organizations to anticipate as much as we possibly can. Who do we want to talk to? Who do we want money from? And build that relationship so that you're just not showing up saying, hey, give me 150 grand, which, I do a lot with baseball.
Right. I'll just share one example before we pivot off of this. Who's been to Disney here before? So I was there again. I'm one of those crazy families. We go as much as we can. But I always take advantage to do a business day of training there. And they have a leadership academy called Be Your Guest. And I love what they get their Imagineers to do. That's their engineers, salespeople, marketers, and they call them Imagineers. This is crazy. They still do this. On their knees, with knee pads, shuffling down Main Street, USA. Why would they do that? That's why we started with this question. If we can put ourselves in the shoes of that person, chances are you're going to write your application a little differently. chances are you're going to have a different conversation, right? I would challenge your teams, whether they're volunteers, whether it's someone you're paying, are we actually in the other person's shoes for 5 minutes? And it's probably 5 minutes more than you were last year, because that's just the reality, right? We're busy moving forward. All right, let's go to the second question. What are some of the key challenges you have faced when developing your grant application?
Your financial situation, your stability, your ability to manage that money when you do get it. So do you have the right type of board or a board in place that can manage that money? Is it going to be safe with that board and be spent in the right way? You may have too many ideas, there's no focus, there's no proper explanation or rationale for your goals or your outcomes. And one of the other things I was thinking about was, for us, it's who do we actually approach for what type of funding? So if we want to run a capital project like redraining our rugby field or getting lights or a new stand or equipment locker, what partners, like where do we go to get that kind of money versus money to run a new program, let's say for handicapped children or disabled children to start playing rugby? And what partners like Jumpstart do we or can we partner up with, and who partners up with different sports?
A lot of our conversation revolved around time. So the time to write them, the time to find different grant applications, basically in the wide world of the internet, and especially ones that matched up with your particular organization, and the amount of time to go through all the particular requirements and make sure that it did match up. And especially the amount of time that it would take to craft your particular one. And we talked about the anguish that a lot of people face over the language that's used to write the particular, even just the first sentence that you put down, and why can't some of these be more like your resume where it's just bullet points of what you can do? Why can't we just put in a chart that shows our percentage of success? That would make a lot of these easier. And then even the wait times on some of these applications, where the amount of stress that generates on people in the organizations. And then the other challenge was how to really articulate sometimes very complex visions in very concise manners. And are we sometimes second-guessing ourselves on how to, I'm trying to summarize your point here, and I'm probably doing it wrong, off my scribbled notes. How to, are we sometimes second-guessing ourselves on what the people are thinking about our ideas and putting too much detail or not enough detail into the applications, because we think that they're going to be asking those questions about our ideas.
The challenges I had on an application with Trillium was sufficient justification for the funding, getting detailed reports to back up the application, and the most difficult of all, surprisingly, was actually in the writing. It was praising sufficiently the application to stay within the required number of words to answer the questions asked. An example was one question we had 1,000 words. I had to break it down to 250 words without losing the needed information.
The websites sometimes don't give you good direction, particularly Trillium, but also the Ontario Grant one. When I was trying to reapply, I just kept getting lost. And they said, oh, you click down there. And I'm going, well, why don't you say that on your website, right? As if I'm supposed to know all the stuff out of magically. And then we lost out on applying just because the instructions weren't that clear. And when I finally clicked on something, I was late by an hour for registering. And the other is when you're writing them, it's trying to think, because the people on the other side have all these political push for where the money goes. Yep. And they've got political background of what the words are in politics these days and what's behind it. And not everybody's lucky enough, if they don't get their first grant done, to get the phone call or an email saying, here's where you made your mistakes, good luck next time. I've never heard of that happening to too many groups. And so you're just at a loss that if you don't have somebody inside that was suggested by Ian earlier, you're left out on the street because those people that do are ahead of you already because they know the key words that pop into everybody's minds when they're reading the applications, and you don't know them. And so you get slid away to the bottom of the pile.
As an organization that has existing programs, so let's say we're writing a grant for a new program or for some sort of capital funding, managing our existing programs and taking volunteer time away from our existing programs to write those grants, right? So do we do this in our off season, or but maybe that doesn't line up with when the grant deadline is? How do we manage that aspect of writing these grants and not only writing the grant, but then following through on it without, again, taking away from the existing programs that are maybe our bread and butter, but we're trying to add to that?
One of the things that I've had experience with is that as a bunch of volunteers, you're doing your very best, but one of the biggest challenges is if you don't have experience in the area of writing grant applications, you're really at a disadvantage. And so a challenge is to find somebody that has previous experience, and if they have political connections or other kinds of connections would really be a help too. So finding those people is really key, but finding them is hard, right? So that's what I've found is probably one of the biggest challenges, because you really are at a disadvantage if you add up the different factors and it makes it difficult.
This is a feature for a volunteer club organization. So the committee meets and says, is there anybody to help us out here? Instead of saying, is there anybody who will write the grant application? Approach it in a way of saying, will somebody volunteer to start the application and then give it to the committee to finish off? Wow. That retains the committee's, each individual's self-respect, and there's still no judgment on whoever submitted it. It's just basically to get somebody to start the application. And then, when it finally goes in, it's the committee. And nobody is personally isolated as having submitted an inadequate application.
When you find a grant is available, start as soon as you can, if you are doing it either as a committee or as a grant writer, in order to give yourself plenty of time. If you're working with a committee, have your brainstorming sessions, because you'll pick up different points that you may or may not have not thought of at the time. And again, because time is so crucial on these applications, don't leave it to the last week and a half before the deadline comes, because you just simply will not make it in time.
That's very interesting. Someone told me the other day, I was working with someone, and he says, Julien, what I've done is I've fallen in love with the process and I'm not married to the results. Because I can't control what other things are there. What I can control is look at my committee. Did we actually put our best foot forward? Or did we kind of wing it a bit and hope that maybe there's no other good applications? And yes, that was the year, right? Let's do the last question. So based on your successful experience, for those of you that have gotten yes, right? What are your recommendations to others? Who wants to share what advice you would have?
It's bigger than yourself.
Ooh.
I'm a rugby guy.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about rugby. It's
right.
what are these rugby players doing in the community that is better in the community?
On a napkin, prod your elected officials.
Oh,
I
cool.
would say go for the most bang for your buck. Because it's hard to there are a lot of possible grants out there, but you kind of have to look at your resources and how much money you're looking for and the size of the application. So if you're going to spend 20 hours on a $2,000 or you're going to spend 20 hours, for $20,000, it makes a lot of difference.
Build the right team.
Build the right team.
Make it a compelling project throughout.
Very good.
In other words, from the start to the finish of the application, keep that as a headline.
Yeah.
Is it compelling to the reader?
Run it by someone who knows nothing about your project. Then you can figure out what questions do they still have and what might they have misunderstood so that you can communicate that effectively.
And now we're going to turn it over to the panel and engage from that standpoint.
So let's kick things off.
Our first speaker is Kevin Wherry. Kevin is this is quite a business card, I should have asked you for one, Kevin. Manager of the Parks and Facilities Planning Branch of Recreation, Cultural and Facility Services with the City of Ottawa. A mouthful of an impressive role. He's been with the city for an awfully long time. He'll tell you more about that. So several grant programs are under Kevin's management. Funding's available for community organizations and sport organizations to do improvements at various city parks and facilities. They're focused mostly on capital rather than operating grants. Kevin has overseen the development of over 50 new parks, numerous renovations and alterations, new community buildings and centers, and the public-private partnerships at Ben Franklin Dome and the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. So really a wealth of experience and a very impressive portfolio. Kevin also manages Ottawa's major and minor community partnership programs. So, without further ado, we'll hear from Kevin Wherry.
Good evening, and thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a mouthful, the department name, but it's what it is. We quite enjoy it, actually. We reorged the city back in October, and so our department actually grew, and we've expanded our portfolio. So for us, the benefit of everything that happened is where before we reorganized at our complexes, we weren't in charge of the maintenance of the rec complexes, so we could have a pool but not be in charge of the pool temperature. We could operate a gym, but not necessarily adjust the humidity. Now that's all completely under our portfolio, so when I look at client service, we are actually fully able to respond to your needs. My job is primarily, I work with capital money, whether it's new build, old build, renovation, and in the case of tonight, my group offers the major and minor community partnership grants. We actually report on this yearly, and basically the idea is that if we give a little, you give a little, we get more in the end. It's 50-50 partnerships for the most part that we do, although if you look closely at the board, you'll see one of my math mistakes. When there's other people's lands involved, we give 110%. Thud. It's actually 3367. But anyway, the Minor Community Partnership Program is one of our greatest successes. It started early in about 2001, shortly after amalgamation, when we realized there was a burning need in the community to do upgrades, and we couldn't afford to do it all by ourselves. We have been giving grants to a maximum of $7,500, matching grant of maximum $7,500 for a very long time. And just this past fall at committee and council, we were able to raise that now to $10,000. So starting next year, call it a cost of living increase. Starting in 2018, the grant maximums are going to be increasing to $10,000 matching dollars. And we're quite proud of that because we realized what you could buy in 2002, 3, and 4 for $7,500, you certainly couldn't buy that same capacity today. So by increasing the grant, we're hopefully increasing the participation in our grant program. In the minor grant program in 2016, we formally received 23 applications and we funded 22 of them. Unfortunately, the one that didn't get funded was because it was actually an application for a project at a school that ended up being cut by the board later in the year. The grant program itself, our biggest and most important thing with this grant program is for people to demonstrate to us that they're adding new recreational capacity to city property or other publicly owned properties. We fund 50-50 on city properties and to a lesser degree on other properties, mainly because we're not in full control of those properties. The major community partnership program is, it came along a few years after our minor community partnership because we realized that there's $7,500 doesn't really get you all that far. And it's meant to increase capacity in much more significant ways. In this year's past round, we received 14 applications and approved 10 of them. And when we say approve, whether it's minor or major, it's an approval in principle because we recognize you're not an expert at coming down to the detailed bottom line cost of what something might cost to build. You have an idea, you've received information from perhaps a contractor or you've looked at other projects, but we will approve you in principle and then fund it once you come up with the final plan. It's, for us, an indication that we really want to work with you to come up with what is the final value of what this project's going to be, and what's the real value of this, where a contractor might say, oh, that'll cost you $4,000, but they don't necessarily take into consideration, for instance, design costs, application fees, all these other things. Long story short, because I hit the 1-minute warning, to find our grant programs, go on ottawa.ca and just simply type in the search box, community partnership. On there, our grant programs come up. And most important to that, attached to those is there's a few names and a few phone numbers. We encourage everybody to call us prior to a grant application. We will work with you. The reason why you hear the success rates in the applications is because we will clear with you whether or not you can, your goal meets the program guidelines. And then also attached to that website are the precise program guidelines. So every time you have an idea of something you would like to improve, review the site, review the information, get a logical order of where you think you have the greatest value and validity, and then give us a call and we will work with you to make sure that is actually going to be the case. Thanks.
Fantastic. That's great, Kevin. Thank you. So a couple of terrific nuggets at the end there and some furious scribbling of notes. Some encouraging news in terms of the proportion of applications that are funded through Kevin's programs, but the advice around where to find the information on the website and some contact information, and what terrific advice, which falls nicely on what David was talking about earlier in terms of building the relationships and finding out information, learning as much as you can, and these folks are actually here to help you be successful. The more successful you are, the more successful they are. So that's some terrific advice there, Kevin. Thank you. This is Lori Bain. As Marcy said, the rose between two thorns, her phrase, not mine. Lori is an advisor working for the provincial government in Ottawa, working for the Regional Services Branch, serving the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. Lori's job primarily is to foster partnerships between community organizations in the not-for-profit sector within Ottawa South and the sports sector in central Ottawa. She works on a variety of local and regional funding programs, including the Ontario Sports and Rec Community Fund. And just because I read it in the bio, and I personally found it very impressive, she's got a history in her CV of some really meaningful work, including working with the City of Ottawa Addiction Services and at a women's shelter. So congratulations on an impressive looking resume, Lori. So over to you for your 5-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Marcy, for inviting me here tonight to be part of the Ottawa Sports Summit. I wanted to start with the Ontario Sports and Recreation Communities Fund grant because it's the most reflective of the audience here. Most of our funding is project-based. So it's important, the points that were made tonight were incredible, actually. And David started a good process with talking about building a relationship. So we are available to build a relationship. My email address is lori.bain@ontario.ca. If you have any questions, you can ask me after the Sports Summit. So about the Ontario Sports and Recreation Community Fund, or OSRCF, the focus is on community sport and recreation. So I'm pretty sure that you could meet that goal. The deadline is January 16th, 2018. If you have a project in mind, please consult. Please give me a call, an email, and consult before you submit an application. If you do not have a project in mind, then take a look at the guidelines on the website and think about a project for next year. It's really important that you start off with the project rather than trying to make the funding work for you. Who can apply? So it's not-for-profit, incorporated. And the target populations, there's a few. We look at Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, multicultural, women and girls, children, youth, and this year there is a new stream with a focus on seniors. So seniors programming for 65 plus. There's other grants, smaller grants that are available to you that can encompass sports and recreation. That includes the Multicultural Community Capacity Grant. The purpose of that is to engage multicultural or ethnocultural newcomers, refugees into the community and to engage them civically, socially, and one of the best ways to engage them socially is through sports and recreation. Another way would be through food. But food could be a component of your project. So you could offer a healthy snack to a group of youth that you want to teach a sport, a Canadian sport. So you want to teach them how to play lacrosse, and you offer a healthy snack at the beginning. The Summer Experience Program, that's for hiring a student for the summer. Those applications usually go out in, those are launched in January for a summer, to hire a summer student. It's about $3,000 and it'll cover the cost for approximately 6 weeks or 30 days for a student to work for you for the summer. It's hopefully to build the capacity of your organization and to ensure that the student gets some experience that's relevant to their education. The other one that I wanted to mention was the Seniors Community Grant, but it's offered quite often through the year. And again, it's focusing on healthy, engaging seniors and ensuring they're healthy. I won't talk any further at that because it's closing. My big plug, though, is for Grants Ontario. So that's where you get your information about the grants that are being offered. You can look them up by sector, you can look them up by ministry, or you can look at them alphabetically. Once you look at the grant, once you choose the grant that you might be interested in, it'll take you to the grant page that offers you the guidelines and the objectives and everything you need to write the application. But also, they show past projects that have been funded. So you can look at projects that have been funded across the province, and if something interests you that's happened in Thunder Bay and that you'd like to initiate in Ottawa, you can connect, we can often connect you with those organizations to talk about how they ran their project and what worked and what didn't work, and you can apply for funding locally for that. Also, you have to register for Grants Ontario. So if you are not currently on Grants Ontario, please register. It takes about 5 business days to get your security key, so you'll be ready to go when you do want to apply for a grant. Once you are signed up for Grants Ontario, you'll get email notifications of grants that are launched. So you'll be up to date. Also, you can email me and I can add you to my list and I can send out any grants that may work for your organization. But I need to get to know your organization before I can actually send you that information.
Thank you, Lori. Terrific.
Yeah.
All right, moving along, we've got Doug Gore. So already we've had many references to the Ontario Trillium Foundation. So Doug's here. Many of you may know Doug, may know the name. He's been doing this for a while, as he may mention in his remarks. So strategy lead around investment in sport and physical activity for the Ontario Trillium Foundation. As I say, well known across the province, an impressive, very impressive portfolio of work since 2002, supporting literally scores of different organizations through grants from the OTF. Prior to OTF, Doug oversaw sport governing bodies including the Ontario Ski Council, Dive Ontario, worked with Participaction, ran a sport marketing company. So Doug knows sport. He's obviously on the grant, the funding side now, but certainly has a great background in sport. During his tenure at Ontario Trillium Foundation, he's overseen more than $100 million in investments in the sector. So with that, please, Doug.
a fantastic segue because I have zero intention about talking about our grants. I'm not kidding. So I work for the Ontario Trillium Foundation. I no longer grant there. I'm in charge of the strategy about what we fund and why it is that we fund it. Research with the industry, external facing with you guys. So I don't have my checkbook, so we're not going to go there. But we do have two things in our toolbox, which is what we call this for you guys. One is money. We have a lot of it. And the second is what we call services to community. We have 4, but I'm really only going to talk about 3 granting programs. They're up there, Seed, Grow, and Capital. And they are intended for different things. One is kind of feasibility, research, something new, piloting something new, which is Seed. Grow is scaling a program that has already worked and you want to grow it. And the third is Capital, which is fix something or renovate something. The second thing in the toolbox is services to community, and that's a whole suite of other things that we do that are workshops in communities on measurement and evaluation, financial literacy, all kinds of capacity building things in the industry has. But I don't want to spend too much time on those because frankly, you can go on our website and find out this stuff in far more depth and probably more accurate than anything I'm going to tell you. I do want to talk about some of the things that you guys talked about tonight and dispel some myths and some, you know, there are kind of truths and half-truths and non-truths, and not that anybody is right or wrong, because everything is shades of gray. And so as I was listening, I heard a lot of amazing stuff, and it got me thinking about an old movie with Jack Nicholson. And he has a great line that I use with my wife all the time, and he's talking to Diane Keaton in the movie, and he says, "I've never lied to you, I've always told you some version of the truth." And it's true, that's what we just talked about. So much of what we talked about earlier is some version of the truth. Not that it's right, not that it's wrong, but it's gray. And so, first comment I have is, the gentleman that started us off tonight, if we follow his lead, there was no other reason for us to be up here talking because he was bang on with everything that he talked about. Most importantly, impact. We're about community impact. We are not, and this is blunt, but we're not interested in the problems of your organization. It's not about your organization. It's about what you do for your community. And you guys do the work, we don't. All we do is invest in you guys to do the amazing work that you do. If we move up behind him, we've got our friend with the word count. 100% true. 250 words to tell us about the amazing stuff that you do, that's tough. But I would submit to you that 90% of the proposals that get put in, you should be able to say in 250 words. Because this is not rocket science. It's really simple. Be succinct. Over here, we had bullet points. Don't use bullet points. Absolutely use bullet points. Absolutely use bullet points. Cut out the flowery language. We don't care. Tell us what the problem is and what you're going to solve. Use bullet points. We had complexity brought up, and this is where the 250 word count does come in. 100% correct, ma'am. We cannot capture complexity in 250 words, and that's a problem for Trillium. And I'm here to tell you that we know that, and we're trying to work on that. And I think that's where there is some validity to the 250 word count. But the point is, be judicious in your use of language. We've talked about words a number of times tonight. We've talked about buzzwords. That came up a few times. No buzzwords. Hate the buzzwords. They don't work. This gentleman talked about have somebody read it for you that doesn't know your business. He's 100% true. We're all sport people, and number one, I'm not a funder, I'm a sport guy. I've been in the sport industry for 25 years. I happen to work at Trillium. I'm a coach, I'm a volunteer. Don't use the buzzwords because we don't know what they mean. If you use LTAD, long-term athlete development, most of us in this room know what that means. You know how many people, the 120 people that work at Trillium, know what that means? This guy. And I don't assess your proposals. Explain what it is that you mean, use your bullet points, be succinct and get to the point, have somebody else read it. To the gentleman up there with the technical issues, 100% right. I hate going in our system because I have a hard time navigating it. Grants Ontario, well, I'm not going to talk about somebody else's business, but you're 100% true. 100% true. The technical interface is a challenge. But, you know why you were an hour late? Because you left it to the last minute. I'm not here to tell you, I'm not here to blame you. There's a deadline, getting to know us, once a year, 365 days. And I don't say that to blame you, sir, I really don't, because I feel your pain. Somebody over here said start early because I guarantee you something is going to go wrong. I guarantee it, whether it's technical, whether you can't find the right documents, whether you can't talk to the right person. If you leave it, you're going to be late. And I'll leave you with the gentleman who, I don't see him here anymore, he had an orange shirt on, but he said, it's bigger than you. That's the single most important thing that I came to talk to you about tonight is, it is bigger than you, solve somebody else's problem. It's not about you, it's not about your organization, it's about what you do for community, and you guys do amazing stuff in community. Talk about the benefit to your community. That's what we're interested in.
Doug has offered some responses to some specific things that came from you folks before the break, which was fantastic. I'd like to offer up to Lori and to Kevin the same opportunity because I know sitting with them, we were all jotting down a bunch of stuff. Much of which we agreed with, a few things where Dispelling Myths was a bit of a theme that we started talking about over the break. So there might be a couple of things where we'd like to challenge some of the ideas that came forward. So I'd like to give to Lori and then to Kevin an opportunity to address maybe one or two things that you heard from the group before the break.
Andrew had mentioned about political connections. That's sort of a myth. In assessing grants, I've never been contacted by an MPP or a minister's office to say that I should recommend this grant. What I will say, though, is you have a political connection or you have a connection in that you can contact us and consult with us prior to submitting your application. So please, please call us or email us. I also wanted to talk about, somebody had mentioned, the rugby person. They mentioned about what are you delivering and is there a need? That is a really good point. And sometimes the way that you can prove that need is at the end of a program, do you do a survey to find out what was missing, what people really want, what they're asking for next. If you have survey results, then you can prove your need. You can provide a rationale because you've actually done the survey. The other thing was, I want to reiterate the point, the woman who likes writing grants, yes, thank you for that. Starting as soon as you can. Like I mentioned, with the Ontario Sports and Recreation Community Fund, if you don't have a project this year, please just look at the guidelines and think about one for next year. It's really important that you start way ahead of the time with your project before you actually submit the application.
Thanks, Laurie. Kevin, did you have a couple of things you'd like to talk about based on what you heard from the group?
There was a few things that came up, but a lot of it's already come out. My number one that I always repeat as well is jargony language or buzzwords. Just call it like it is. We know, we've been in this business for a very long time. I don't need a sales pitch. What I need is straight goods on my applications. And to me, what I think is key, well, I already mentioned it in my original talk, communication is very important. I mentioned how many successful applications were approved. What I didn't mention was the over 100 phone calls that came in with an idea that didn't end up being approved and they didn't go through the effort of the application. We didn't have to break a heart. It's important for us to have these conversations so that we understand what you're asking for and whether or not it's something that is actually applicable. I hate to see people spend weeks of effort on something that does not stand a chance. And one of the big key things for us, one of the most important things of every grant, is going to do a capital upgrade to a city park or even other publicly owned lands. It needs to be for something that is publicly accessible. To do an improvement to have a private club-related item only for them go forward, that runs into complications. The larger the project, the more important it is, and we put right in our guidelines, buy-in from a community. If you are, we mentioned rugby, if you're a rugby team and you want to do an improvement to a park so that only rugby can play there and only your rugby team can play there, you might not be as successful as coming in saying, we would like to improve rugby, access to rugby for the entire city of Ottawa. This is what we would like to do, and we would like to do a majority of the bookings at this facility. Those are the kinds of language, and that's the kind of focus you need to have. It's not just about your interest or your league or your organization. It's about the way your league, your organization is going to improve recreation and sport for the city of Ottawa.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to very quickly follow on, and I'm not in these folks' shoes, and I'm not somebody that reviews and makes decisions or is a strategic lead around the funding, but I do work with in the world of communications, and the one piece of advice I'd offer in terms of the context, and you folks can agree or disagree, but it seems to me there's real value in telling a story versus writing an essay. I think back to when my kids were in university, and of course, as the writer in the family, I'm always doing the review of the essays before they go in, and the effort. And I remember doing this as a university student, trying to drop in these $24 words. You're not entirely sure what it means, but it's a big word, so it's going to impress whoever's doing the reading. Problem with that is, of course, that it just confuses things. So if you can think about more, what's your story? What's the story you're trying to tell? And that's the story about your organization. That's the story about the impact that you're trying to have. That's the story about what difference is it going to make if you received those funds. But really tell it like a story. And if you've got a testimonial, if you've got somebody's personal story that you can weave into your application, so it becomes real then. It's not just conceptual, it's real, as opposed to putting together something that reads like an essay. I don't know about you, but I'd much rather read a short story than an essay. So make it a more pleasurable experience for folks like these who have to review those applications, and they're trying to get a sense for what difference is the funding of that project going to make.
This question is for Doug. Is there still an opportunity for a one-on-one over the phone with a program manager for an application with your organization?
It's a great question. Yes, back to, I think it was Dave that brought it up earlier about building that relationship. We made a colossally stupid decision a couple of years ago when we launched our new investment strategy to not talk to anybody. Knee-jerk reaction to the Auditor General saying if you're not going to talk to everybody, you can't talk to anybody, even though a number of us thought it was dumb. Of course, a year in, we realized dumb, 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 dumb. We've heard communication. We've heard get to know the organization. So for the last year, we've reinstituted that, yeah. So we've got a whole team of people, and that's actually all they do. They don't assess. There are 9 of them, and all they do is talk to you guys. And they will talk specifically about your application. They'll walk you through our investment strategy. They'll answer your questions. They won't tell you what to write, in most cases, unless you're really nice to them, but their sole job is to work with you to refine your application so it can be as good as it is. And we are actually now starting to track success rates about those that we talk to and those that we don't. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. We're a public entity that's supposed to be, have equity across, but anecdotally, I'd tell you, you're way more successful if you talk to us, much like you are with these guys.
Specifically, this is a tennis club on land owned by Ottawa and then run by a volunteer group under the rules that the city has, okay? The fence around the club has suddenly been revealed as leaning, not dangerously at the moment, but very definitely, potentially in a few years, out onto the public land. The tennis club itself is owned by the City of Ottawa. Have you had experience of an application for a grant relative to that kind of situation?
Not every club, but almost every club now, we have agreements with the clubs. And within those agreements for the operation of the club and the exclusive use of the land as a club, we will typically have language about who's responsible for what. They're not all the same. A lot of these predate amalgamation, for instance, so there are different ways different municipalities treated them. the first thing I would look at, I would give to any organization that has concerns over this, is to find your original agreement or call us to get a copy of the original agreement and see the language that's in there regarding upkeep and maintenance, including life cycle replacement. By the sounds of it, a fence that's leaning over is there's an end-of-life issue. The agreement would typically speak to that. If it's a city-owned asset and it's a major cost, it is often our responsibility, but not always. So that would be your first thing to look at. If in your agreement it is your responsibility, though, we would be unlikely to give you a grant to take care of your responsibility.
Thank you, Kevin.
We might give you one.
You can start a bidding war. It's like Dragon's Den we got going on here. I'll make an offer.
My question is, do you have exclusivity for your funding versus Trillium and let's say Ontario? Is there, if we had a capital investment we were looking for, is there an exclusivity clause that you have, so getting funding from multiple sources?
Get money, Lori's money first, and then our money, because we don't care where it else comes from, and she does. So yeah, some that's one of the key things with funders, that some will have a certain mix, and I think Lori has a certain mix of public funds that is available to you. I don't know what that is, Lori. Yeah, it's but and we frankly don't care where it comes from. So I'm kind of being facetious, but I'm kind of not. Like, get Lori's money first, and then get ours.
You said it. That's good.
Any potential differences we should be aware of between publicly funded granting agencies or granting bodies, and I know there's also a lot of private grants that you can go for. You guys are all publicly funded grants, so I'm hoping that you guys can provide at least a little bit of insight in terms of what potential differences we should be aware of when actually looking at what grants to apply for from that perspective.
For us, whenever I see private grant opportunities and it employs something that's going to happen on a city land, our big cautionary note is what is tied to that opportunity. Often we will see requirements coming in to put in a sign, a recognition, something recognizing the contribution by this bank, this store. We have rules and regulations and requirements when it comes to any kind of signage or advertising on city land, and they could very well come into conflict and cause you a grief.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we actually partner with the private sector on some things, and in fact I've worked with private sector funders on their models, and in fact I'm doing that with Canadian Tire and Jumpstart. That came up earlier right now, so we're actually kind of working through some things together and looking at shared measurement systems and things. So my take is, and it's just me, this is not an official Trillium thing, is there used to be quite a chasm between, we're fairly similar in the kinds of things that we do and our approaches, and there used to be quite a chasm between us and the private sector, although the private sector is far more diverse in the way they go about doing things. So it really is, the message is still do your homework and find out what it is that they want. But what I would say is the worlds have started to come together more around, and we've talked a lot about it here tonight, about outcomes and impact, right? It's not about the capacity of your organization. It's not about your problem. What are you producing? And the private sector has in fact, in some ways, led the way in what am I getting for my money? There's the PR piece, but there's also what are those social outcomes that you are solving by the investment, and so I think it's much, much closer. But the overall message is find out what they want and see if it aligns with you. There's no magic stick.
We recognize clearly there are folks in the room that have lots of experience writing successful grants, maybe some of them unsuccessful, but there are clearly folks who've been at this for a while. We also recognize that there are probably folks here who are first-timers, who have no experience in the grant writing field. We've had quite a bit of good advice, both here from the panelists and from folks that have come with this experience, but I wonder, just for the panelists, the best advice you could offer for somebody who's new to this, who's going to do this for the first time, something perhaps we haven't heard yet? Is there any additional advice that you could offer for that first timer? Lori?
I would say number one is go through the guidelines and use the guidelines. They actually, as far as the application questions go, there is an application guideline that lists every point that they are looking for in each answer. So if you have the application on one side and the application guidelines on the other side, you can make sure that you cover all the bases. The assessments are based on those application guidelines. So I can't stress enough. And consult. When you have your project ready, consult before you submit your application.
When you say consult, Lori, who are you suggesting they consult with?
You can call me, and I will hook you up with your regional advisor, depending on what area of Ottawa you're in, or if you're outside of Ottawa.
Great. Doug, did you have a point?
It's more the same. It is, and you guys captured it really well. It's do your homework, right? It's hard work to get these things, and make sure that everything that you do aligns. And if you have access to a person, talk to them. And I guess the other thing is there's no hidden criteria. There isn't, right? Like what's in the guidelines, that's what you're actually judged on, right? And a lot of us actually post the assessment. We put it right on our website. That's what you're being scored on. Just write it like that. So there seems to be sometimes, and I'm not suggesting this crowd, but sometimes when you're out in the community, they think there's hidden criteria or things that we want to hear. We don't want to hear. We want to hear what you want to do and how you're going to do it. That's it.
Thank you. Kevin, anything to add for the first timer?
I think everything they've said is exactly the same for us. We simplify it with an application form like many other people. So, even dry run things. Give yourself time. Don't come in at the deadline. And we have deadlines. We have 3. One's the 1st of May and the 1st of September for the minor community, and once a year on March 1st for the major. If you miss those deadlines, you miss construction seasons. You might miss a year of development. So always plan this thing through. And the last piece of advice I have, especially when working on city property, actually even other properties, yourself as an individual or as an organization, for us, it's really key that you're actually an organization of some sort. We do work with small groups, unincorporated, but to be a registered not-for-profit allows us an easier, faster delivery process. There's a lot of legalities involved when doing work on city land, and to have a group that I can offer insurance to is very important to me. And if you're green and you have an idea, build that idea into an organization of some sort that is easier for us to deal with than an individual.
There's nothing like experience. If you know anybody, a bunch of people put their hands up because they've been successful, go ask them. Honestly, that's what my colleagues who assess grants, they continually come to me and say, can you give me examples of what this grant result means? And so I use your work, the people that are successful. I say, there's a really good one. So if you can, ask somebody that's done it because they've been through the wars.
Great. Great advice for the first timer and the 10th timer. Thank you very much.
So my key takeaway is to start the planning early, get help, and get advice before you submit, because you don't want to just submit it and cross your fingers and hope for the best.
You know what my key takeaway, it's funny coming here was, they want us to succeed as well. No, really, because they have KPIs. They want to make sure that the money is invested in community and so forth. So I think that was a big insight, and I'm glad that everybody caught up on that. So very good. Who else wants to share a key takeaway?
I think it's just what you've reinforced to me is that it's not about my organization or our problems or our needs. It's actually what we're doing in the community. So when I go to my board, my 10-member board that often gets lost in some of the discussions of our challenges, I can't be sort of using that in how I phrase our need for grant money.
We were chatting a lot about the demystification of it all, yes, really, is what it was, and to know that they're real. Yeah. I mean, we have Google, and you look through all of the pages and all of these grants, and I think it's important to meet people who have been successful writing this, to see that the money is there for the community and has done great things for the community. So I think that's a huge incentive for people who haven't written grants before or hadn't applied for them for whatever reason, is to know that people have been successful doing this and it's within our community.
So the reason I got attracted to this movement was that belief that there should only be positive experiences in sport. And what we mean by that is if we're having some, we need to share, and if we're not, how can we help you? And really, if you think about it, tonight gave me confidence that we're all facing the same thing. And hopefully, Marcia will kind of finish it here today. Let's help each other.
I was asked to come here. I had no idea what I was coming for other than how to apply for a grant or whatever, and absolutely no understanding what's going on. What I'm walking away with is more of a general thing. I now understand how to apply for a grant. I also understand that I have people on the grant side that I can go to for help. I have phone numbers and emails, and people can there to be able to help us. And I honestly believe that once I take this back to my people, that we do have a clear understanding of how we can put this thing together. Thank you.
One interesting point, Mr. Gore mentioned take Laurie's money first and then come to Trillium.
Yes.
Aha. Now, that means there are sources. Therefore, find the bloody sources.
Yep.
See how you are supposed to access them. And, well, you might, Chris's might come twice in the year for all you know. So I found that a very useful tidbit of information. Thank you.
I guess we've all got really great ideas for things that we want to do, and we've got all, it's massive what we think about what we want to do, but we have to be able to, I guess, taking away from this is boil it down to a very clear, concise, understandable message that everybody can understand, anybody reading it can understand to get us going. They don't need all the nitty-gritty details or things that are out of the way, but something that anybody can understand.
Outside of everything I did learn about grants in general, the one thing that really struck me looking back through my notes was when he said that there are no hidden criteria because of the number of times I've sat there looking and thinking, what are they really looking for? It's good to know that they are actually only looking for what's on the paper.
The one thing I'm going to take away from this one today is listening to the various speakers, the panels, and the people that were here to participate. The one takeaway I'm going to have is I believe we need to better define the demographic that we're trying to serve in the community and to consider how we can better serve their needs.
One of the biggest things that this whole panel has said to probably everybody in this room is no buzzwords. That is so important because we all thought they were there. And I also very appreciate when Laurie said if you look on her site, she not only has the form, she's got a full list of what every field wants. How many people have no idea what that field wanted?
This is a reminder that change is not easy. 1967, first day in Sweden where they changed what side of the road cars were going to drive. I love these historical pictures. So you're going to get out of here, you might be fired up, you might say I'm going to have a phone call with Laurie or whoever else you're going to approach. Guys, this is not easy. Someone reminded me the other day, it's not for the faint of heart, because you're going to get some no's. But if you believe in your why and you commit to it, I think there's a great chance that you might surprise yourself this year proactively, right? That was the key theme tonight. Let's be proactive with this. Lastly, I just want to share one last thing. I love these slides. I don't know who created this. I can't look at it, I get vertigo. But please, look at that. Isn't that amazing? Try to take 5 minutes to see it from the other perspective, from the person reading your application. Really. You're seeing it as 3, it's clear as night and day. The other side is saying, I'm not seeing the same thing. Try to do that. And if you can't do it, ask a friend. Call a friend, I think is what Dan was saying, right?
Well, the Ottawa Sport Council is a not-for-profit as well, just like all of you guys are. The difference is we don't deliver end-user programs. We aren't putting those people on the field or on the arena or on the tennis courts. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build the capacity of all of your organizations. So we rely on grants as well. And I just want to put two things forward. The first is the consultation. So in the last week, I've had a consultation with both Lori and Doug, who said, great idea, we won't fund it. So let me tell you, the consultation works. Don't spend your time, you know, going down the grant. And they both said, we totally agree with what you want to do is very valuable, but in the way that we fund, you won't fit into our funding criteria, so don't spend your time doing it. So my heart's broken. Kind of had my plans together for January and February and writing these applications, and I guess I'm coming up with new ideas. So, you know, really, really important. The second thing is, and I've offered it to many of you before who've contacted me, and I've done it for a number of you, I will look over your grants. I won't, your grant applications. I won't spend a million hours dotting I's and crossing T's, but I can do that you know, kind of third-party view and tell you I don't get what you're saying or I do get what you're saying. I've done it for a number of organizations before. As many of you know, we have the Ottawa Sport Council Foundation, and we grant out money once a year, very, very small grants for community sport organizations who want to make a difference, and they want to improve accessibility to sport. So earlier this year, we granted out to the Ottawa Titans Water Polo Association, working in conjunction with Awesome Ottawa, Lisa Vexler's here, to create a water polo program for children on the autism spectrum. And we also granted out a small grant to LACA Soccer Club to deal with transportation issues on getting children who couldn't access a program that was free to that specific program. So we also grant out small little grants. We got in something like 30 grant applications this year. Probably of the 30, 10 were acceptable, 20 were not. I sent out emails to everybody who applied and said, I'd be delighted to go over your grant application with you. And not one person took me up on it. So learn from what you've gone through. Take the opportunity. If you get the opportunity to have feedback, take that opportunity. Because this is not, as Julien would say, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. Take it, learn it, apply it. So those are kind of my offers around, you know, grants and my experience, and I'm in this with you, and it's why we thought that this topic was so necessary, what we'd heard from you. So on that, we'll close. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and if you've got any questions, you know where to reach me, and we'll be back in touch. Thank you.
I think what's really important for everybody is to take some time to reflect. What did you hear? What were the things that you wrote down, and why did you write those things down? Where's the meaning attached to those things that you're taking away? Oftentimes we'll attend a conference, we'll attend a workshop, and we find it motivating and educational and all of those things, and then about 30 seconds after we've left, we're back into the thick of the daily routine, and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to reflect on what it is we learned and why it was important and how we can apply it. So take the information and then figure out maybe who are the next 2 or 3 people that you want to proactively reach out to invite for a cup of coffee or whatever it is, just to build that relationship and learn some more.
You have to go back to why are we doing this? You go back to you're doing it for the kids, you're doing it for the community, you're doing it for your friends, you're doing it because that sport gave you so much growing up, hence you feel an obligation to give back. You go back to the why and things will get easier.